Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Brace yourself for a very special edition of Renegade Thinkers Unite, starring a true renegade, Trip Hunter, currently the CEO of Silicon Valley ComicCon and the head of marketing for a powerhouse startup called Primary Data. Trip is one of the most creative people I know, and I should know since we worked together for 12 and a half years at Renegade. We're going to be talking a lot about what Trip's been doing over the last 7 years, which has really been helping startups cut through via savvy strategies and brilliant, and I really mean that, brilliant creative execution. Welcome to the show, Trip.
Thank you, Drew. I'm not sure I deserve that wonderful introduction, but I appreciate it.
Yes, you do. So, and let's start one of the reasons is congrats on a successful year for Silicon Valley ComicCon.
Thank you.
It's amazing. You know, there are a lot of Comic-Cons already when you started this 2 years ago. How did you make sure that Silicon Valley ComicCon was unique?
Well, it's a great question. Steve Wozniak is one of the partners of both companies that I work at, and he wanted to do a Comic-Con that was not just about pop culture. He wanted it to include science and technology because in his mind, these two things drive each other. And so I don't think there are many shows out there that balance content between technology and pop culture as well as we do.
And it's amazing because I saw that, of course, I was at both of the events, and it's amazing to see that. You would see somebody dressed up as like a pirate asking the NASA panel what was going on with Mars and is it Cressida? And it was just phenomenal to watch these two cultures intersect.
Yeah, and we even had CEOs of tech companies doing a panel dressed up, which was even more incredible to see. So that was really exciting. I think one of the other things that we did that most Comic-Cons don't do is we theme ourselves. And our theme for this year was the future of humanity. Where will we be in 2075? And it gave a context to everything that people saw and heard.
You know, future of humanity is that is a courageous statement. How did you come up with that, and how do you think you delivered on it?
I came up with it, and I would have to credit it to Jeff Bezos, because I read an article and he was quoted in the article, and he said this thought, and it blew my mind. And the thought was that in 50 or 60 years, Mars will be zoned for heavy industry and Earth will be zoned as residential. And I'd never had a thought like that before in my life. And I thought, the whole thing kind of came together, and I thought, let's do this thing on where will we be? Because if that's where we'll be, I got a lot of things to learn. Wow.
And, but that's talk about, again, I'm going to use the word courageous. That's a big, bold vision, the future of humanity. Were you at all like, how are we going to do this?
I was, but I also was thinking, who are we talking to, and who do we want to get interested in this? And I think that theme really helped us engage companies like NASA and Virgin Galactic and SETI, and a lot of the quantum physicists at Caltech. They saw this as something that they are pursuing, and it gave them the ability to kind of wax poetically about the futures that they're trying to contribute to.
Which is, and the fact that you were able to get SETI and NASA and these other folks there is amazing. Talk a little bit about the process of enticing these, like SETI, getting them to come here. Cause I know you visited SETI, which must have been cool in and of itself.
Yeah. Yes, it was. And, it was almost a domino effect. What I found out was how willing a lot of the top scientists and technologists are to be a part of something like this and be able to talk about what they're doing. And I have to give Popular Science, the magazine, a lot of credit, because I would read their content and then I would be like, oh, that's a cool person. And I would go online and try to track them down and send them an email. And in most cases, that person responded to me. and then they introduced me to two people, and they introduced me to two people, and pretty soon, we're sitting in the offices of SETI wondering, what can we do together? So it really was just this amazing chain reaction.
But just again, having the chutzpah to believe that you could get these folks to show up at a Comic-Con is I would say brazen
and ignorant.
but you did. And I sat in on a panel where you had NASA scientists and the writer, Andy Weir, the writer of The Martian. And it was an incredible combination, and I won't say clash of cultures, but bringing together the sort of science and science fiction. And that's a part of this, right?
It is a huge part of it, and that's really was the vision that Woz had when he said if we were going to do something like this, because we all didn't need another job, we were all pretty busy, but if we were going to do something like this, he wanted it to impact people in a way that other cons weren't. And when he finished with Apple, he went and taught fifth grade math for 8 years, and I don't think many people know that about him. That was a real cornerstone of what he wanted to create, which is why when you saw our event, we had a science fair on Friday supporting Earth Day. We had a science fair on Sunday supporting space and exploration. And we reached out to all the local high schools and got those kids, to come and be a part of this thing. And that was really exciting.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from, top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Let's talk a little bit about the marketing, because in theory, this is a marketing podcast. What were some of the keys to, this was like the biggest event. I remember you telling me that this was the biggest event that San Jose Convention Center had ever done. That was year one. And then you topped it in year two. Can you offer some insights into your overall approach to marketing that maybe would help others?
Sure. I think the first component of it, which might not have anything to do about marketing, is recognizing a need. And we saw a hole in Silicon Valley for an event like this. So I think that there were a lot of people waiting to listen. Our marketing approach was really a layered approach, and I learned this through working with you and the brilliant people at Renegade, was from mass to grass. And so we started with, we had a relatively small marketing budget, but we ran outdoor billboards on the 101 in and out of San Francisco, and we did a lot of mass stuff. But it's the grass stuff that I think really drove the audience, because social media is so key for these people, because they're incredibly passionate. They live this world when they're not at an event. And so in order to be able to tap into them, you really need social. You really need to be engaging them on that level.
And you had an amazing social agency working for you, I understand.
Yeah, I think it was called Renegade. Have you ever heard of it?
Whoa, no, you're kidding me. Okay. Disclosure, yes, Renegade was indeed the social media agency, and it was a labor of love. It's wonderful when you get to work on a social account where the fans are truly engaged. Let's just talk about, from your perspective, the role that social did play in the overall marketing program, pre, during, post.
Yeah, I think one of we started with nothing 2 years ago. We had no social following at all. So it takes a while to build that up. And then once you kind of hit a certain level, it starts to grow pretty quickly. But one of the reasons that I think it was successful was we focused on creating ownership. So we weren't just talking to people, we were engaging them and asking them how they wanted to shape the event. And we gave them, and that empowerment allowed them to recommend guests, allowed them to, one person said, I want to do a cosplay show for dogs. And no, I don't think anybody had done a doggy cosplay show. And that became a huge component. And the press loved that. And that came directly from the people that we were listening to. So again, I think it was about listening and then giving people the ability to help shape and create the event.
Well, it's funny that you would use listening because that is just happens to be the chapter in the CMO's periodic table that you represent, the element of listening.
Yes.
But we're going to talk about that in the second half of this show. I just want to wrap up this section though and dive a little deeper into the user experience. There were issues that came up in year one. Every time you do an event, it's a learning experience, and this is a live event. Can you talk about some of the user experience changes based on listening that you made between the first event and the second event?
Yeah, well, absolutely. We came out of the first year event and we did a survey to all of our attendees, and we heard some very clear issues with how the event was run, that the lines were too long, there wasn't enough food, and it was way too crowded. And so we took that learning and we expanded the event. So we had outgrown the convention center, which is funny because I remember standing in the middle of that thing before year one thinking, how the hell are we ever going to do this? And then year two, it was like, it's too small. We had 62,000 people the first year, and it was too small. So we closed off streets. We put in an outdoor festival, which opened up our event to the public. You didn't need a ticket for that. We moved ticketing to a separate building. We brought in some other places where we could do our larger, content. And it really helped. We had 60 food trucks in the park so people could go out there and sit down. We had movies at night and music. And so it really kind of started to go towards a South by Southwest model versus just contained to one building. And I think, you had your finger on the pulse of the social media the whole time. The complaints were very, very few.
Oh my gosh, it was almost non-existent.
Yeah.
It was incredible, the difference between year one and year two. And, we spent the whole time in year one, frankly, sort of, trying to address some of the issues that were really operational issues, not content issues. And year two, we really could just simply amplify, and celebrate. And that's a wonderful, a change that you were able to do. And I think that's a great place for us to take a break.
Can I add one thing to that?
Sure, of course.
The one thing I would add to that is what we learned is that social determines the quality of your brand immediately. And with Woz at the point of our sword, he garners a lot of attention, and a lot of the press care about what he says and what he does. And that automatically instilled a very high quality brand that we needed to maintain. And if we hadn't been right on top of customer complaints on an hourly basis every day, then you're condemned immediately. And so social helped us drive that and put enough emphasis on responding to social comments on an hourly basis. And I think it really paid off because it builds up equity in your brand, and people are willing to maybe forgive a mistake or two at the event because they've seen that you've been responsive to it. And I think that's one of our biggest learnings.
Yeah, that's really, really, really interesting. And it is such a reminder because so many people think about social channels as just a broadcast channel, when in fact, a lot of the content came out of social listening and, and also from an operations standpoint, you literally changed the event around based on the feedback that you got from social. So, all right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to switch gears, because Trip actually has two jobs. And he's also head of marketing for a startup, an amazing startup called Primary Data, and also worked at a company called Fusion.io that went public. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, some of the things that, he did while he was, at Fusion and at Primary Data. So, stay tuned.
Renegade Thinkers Unite is brought to you by Social Media Explorer, the website that explores the world of social media from the inside out. Great advice from today's leading social media columnists and experts at socialmediaexplorer.com. That's socialmediaexplorer.com.
All right, we're back. My guest is true renegade thinker, Trip Hunter, who is both the CEO of Silicon Valley ComicCon and the head of marketing for Primary Data. So, Trip, in my book, you and I talked about the power of listening and how that resulted in a very fun program called the Crappy Code Competition, which, not too many people would be necessarily celebrating anything with the word crappy in it. So can you explain where that idea came from and how it ended up working?
Yes, I will. My boss at the time at Fusion said, "You must not like your job very much." When I presented that campaign to him, but he had faith in us enough to let us do it and see if it would be successful. And I think the insight there was, companies have a tendency to talk about how great their product is, their technology is, all the benefits, but nobody really listens to initially to what the challenges are. And so we started asking people, rather than, hey, look at all the problems we solve, we started asking people, what are the challenges that you're facing? Now Fusion.io was the first company to create solid state storage for large enterprises that replace disk drives. Super fast technology, 1,000 times faster than a disk drive. And a lot of people were saying that they were skeptical that our product would work because the code, the legacy code that existed in their systems was so crappy, and it would just get added to. It was almost like vines in a garden. Nobody paid attention to it. And then pretty soon the flowers just start to die because the vines are so thick that, sunlight can't get through. And so we heard that and we thought, okay, if crappy code is what's slowing this stuff down, we believe that our system is so fast that it can flush crappy code down the toilet.
Okay.
Essentially. And so we challenge people, and writing crappy code is very difficult. So we created a series of programming challenges where we invited coders to write the crappiest code that they could. And then we would run that crappy code against on our system. And if we could notice a noticeable slowdown in the performance of the chunk of code running on our system, then they would win. So they had to essentially show that our product was crap.
Wow.
It was risky.
Yeah, a little bit. But in some sense, a real torture test for the product. At the end of the day, that's what you did. And you got these software developers involved, aware of, and the result of this program from a marketing standpoint, what do you think it accomplished for you?
Well, we know exactly what it accomplished. It ended up driving about $6.5 million in business for us, and this was in our European market. It had some very tangible results to it, but it also brought coders who were unaware of what we were doing into our company in a way where they felt like they were partners with it. Because we weren't trying to shove marketing at them. We were trying to show how great they were. And they loved that. And, it's funny, we almost got arrested because which is great, right? A good way to start the story. We built a golden toilet. It was called the Throne, and we attached it to a dolly. And we ran a social campaign in London where we would wheel this golden toilet out and we would put it in front of a pub. And the first coder who found where the location of the toilet was and sat on it and texted "Sequel by the Sea" would win a prize. And then we would open up that pub for 2 hours for drinks. And so they would text all their friends, and pretty soon we'd have this huge party going. And we were running that thing across Canary Wharf in London, and the police, the bomb squad, came out after us. But
oh well, but
we got some good press out of that.
Yeah, I bet. And did you end up in the bar?
Yeah, and we did that. We probably did a dozen of those events, and we would end up with 200 people in the bar, and we would just open it up for free drinks, and then we would be able to kind of talk about the crappy code games, and they could enroll in the next one that was coming to a location around them. So that's kind of how we use social to drive awareness for the program.
That's so cool. So you orchestrated a lot of stunts, I know, at your events, whether it was for Fusion IO or in the launch of Primary Data. Can you share? So that, Crappy Co is pretty risky, obviously, almost getting arrested. That had some risk. What were some of the others? I mean, I know you had a thing with a motorcycle inside, but what would you say was the riskiest one that you were sweating the most?
I think they're all pretty risky. And Again, I have to, give kudos to your agency and to Renegade and what you taught me as a young marketer, because I learned that if you're not taking a risk with your brand, nobody's going to pay attention. And that didn't mean the risk had to be tailored to the brand, right? So if you're doing something for a bank, it couldn't be, topless dancing girls. That wasn't going to work. Red Bull, maybe. And so everything that we've tried to do, we've tried to say we're a little nervous about how this is going to go. And just to go back to the most recent one, Primary Data, it's a software company. We automate the flow of data across disparate storage systems. And up until recently, that's been a very manual process. But moving data has been very, very difficult. So we kind of took a page out of American Ninja Warrior, and we created an obstacle course that is by rings. So you swing from ring to ring to ring. And if you fall in foam pits. And this was what we did at VM World, which is a giant trade show, which is a pretty stodgy trade show where everybody's kind of peddling their wares. But then they would get to our booth, and people have helmets on, and they're swinging from rings, and the line at that booth was constant all day long. For 8 hours, we had 30, 40, 50 people in line. And then you have the sales guys just standing around engaging with them in a very conversational way and talking about what we do. So, that was a rewarding one, and something that we were a little nervous about in that environment, but it worked out great.
So, and what was the connection to the brand for Primary Data? I mean,
the connection was that moving data shouldn't be this difficult. It was a really hard obstacle course, and so essentially what we were saying is that you're the data, and this is what data has to go through in order to move from one place to another.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from, top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
You've done a number of, as I call these stunt-like event experiences, and they seem to work every time. Yet when you go to another event, you find that 9 out of 10, make it 49 out of 50, show up with a standard booth. So It makes it easy for you to cut through. It's amazing.
It does. And it is about risk. And I think people are as cautious about doing something risky from a marketing perspective for the audience as they are about for themselves. They don't want to lose their job. And it's easier to just do the standard thing because nobody's going to blame you for that.
So one of the keys that you mentioned this a couple of times to being able to take risks like this is obviously you have to have a boss or a couple of bosses that will embrace it and say, you're next on the line, or what? Right. But we appreciate you trying, and that has to be the case, right? I mean, you need the support of management in order to do this.
Yes, you do. You absolutely do, and I've been blessed to have it in the jobs that I've had. I'm really lucky. I actually think for our CMO, who is the same at Fusion as it is at Primary Data, Rick White, is a brilliant marketer, and I actually kind of rein him in. I'm like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't go that far. So it's a great position to be in.
Yeah, no, well, it's true, and that's what it takes. So let's talk. You did the Ninja Warrior thing for Primary Data. Let's go over one other, because I love these examples. Was it Fusion that you had the motorcycles inside the tent, and they had about 3 feet of clearance? I mean, what was
Nitro Circus? Yes.
What was the story there?
It was actually the launch of Primary Data, but we'd used Nitro Circus once before. For the launch of Primary Data, we wanted to do something that was, also big and about moving, just because moving data is what we do. And so we brought Nitro Circus into South Hall, which is a building at the San Jose Convention Center. And these guys, they set up massive ramps, and it took all day to set up the ramps. And the first guy goes off the ramp on his motorcycle, and this is an enclosed building. And the ceiling is 80 feet in the air. And as he goes by one of the giant lights, he reaches out and taps the light.
Oh, no, my goodness.
Whoa. And I came over and I said, well, I'm not sure this is going to work. And he said, no, it's going to be fine. That light was a good 3 feet from me.
Wow.
So we changed some things around, but the next time he went off, he did a backflip, and, he was right next to the ceiling. It didn't seem to bother anybody. So away we went, and Nitro Circus did their, a big indoor show, and people loved that.
And again, what was the sort of idea behind that stunt? I mean, obviously, we all know that you can put a gorilla in a jockstrap and get attention, but linking it back to the brand is the hard part of these things. So, what was the story there?
I think again, it had to do with data, with moving, and that moving data is difficult, and there are very few people that know how to do it. Nitro Circus in this instance was, one of those very special groups that knows how to do this, and nobody else does. And so Primary Data, what we're trying to do hasn't really been accomplished yet. And so we kind of put ourselves in that vein. Now, granted, that's a pretty thin line. It's about Nitro Circus. They're just amazingly cool to watch. And for a launch party, it doesn't take much more than that.
Okay, right. Well, it was a launch party, so you had a contained audience for sure, and that made it that much more special. But it was a big investment for a startup. And you've managed to make some big investments in certain ways. And so let's just talk about that as we sort of wrap up the episode. Is how do you make the decisions to invest in these kind of bigger stunts, as opposed to some other thing like everybody, wants to do programmatic marketing? I mean, what's your key?
Yeah. And I think we do that because we're a new company and we're in a new field. Data mobility is not something that a lot of people are familiar with. I think they're familiar with the pain of having expensive storage that's full with cold data, but they don't know what to do with it. So, we started out with we wanted to make a bang and get people to pay attention. So that was our launch party. And we have Steve Wozniak, who's part of the company too. So that helps us. But then we moved in, we're not doing that stuff all the time. We moved into education because we needed to start talking about what we did, but I correct myself because we didn't want to do the talking. We engaged analysts, and we thought if we can convince analysts, then they'll become a megaphone for us. Rule number one is if you can get somebody else to talk about your brand, it's much better than having yourself talk about your brand.
Love that. And I think that's a great place for as we talk about this. What would you say of all these experiences was the toughest lesson you've learned when it's come to marketing?
Oh my God, that is such a great question. For me, the toughest lesson has been staying up with the evolution of marketing. And I think it's really easy for us to become complacent in the channels that we've tried. It worked before, it will work again. And that is absolutely not the case. And it's one of the things that Silicon Valley ComicCon has taught me, especially as I move, back to kind of B2B marketing, is the importance of social and all of the different channels working together harmoniously.
Yes, and I think that's so key. And I'm going to attempt to wrap up. This has been a great conversation, and I'm going to. Here we go. So when we talked a lot about Silicon Valley ComicCon, and there were a couple of things I just want to point out. One, there was really a bold vision for the event, year two, this future of humanity, a bold theme. And you think about, you can call it a tagline, but think about what you're saying about your brand and the vision vision that you're presenting, having a big, bold one like that really raises the bar and raises expectations for everybody. Secondly, or probably this even happened before, is before they had the theme, they recognized a need. Obviously, that this mixture of pop culture and technology and science could come together. I love the way you sort of talked about putting a marketing plan together from both mass market. You did use traditional media with outdoor, and PR was a big part of it, but also the role that social played on multiple levels. We talked a lot about user experience early on, and how you got to listen and you got to make sure you fix it. It's okay. It's okay to have some problems, right? And it's okay to be honest about those problems as long as you fix them. And what's amazing is watching from year 1 to year 2 how you guys actually addressed every single one of the big issues that came up on surveys and in social. In terms of, and also the implication that has for the brand, again, you can make mistakes if you admit them and address them, year on. We then spent a lot of time talking about just being bold and courageous, at your events. And there's nothing worse than doing an event and not getting anybody at the booth. The sales guys are sitting around, and Tripp provided 2-3 examples of how they were able to get their big traffic at the booth. And then I guess lastly, I got to say one other thing key here. You can't be a renegade thinker without a boss or an infrastructure that will support you. Tripp has mentioned he's lucky enough to have a CMO that supports him there, but also a team that can execute this. So, recognizing that, being a renegade thinker, is great, but you have to, you need some support from above, and then you have to have the team to get it done. And then finally, you wrapped it up at a perfect place, is that, marketing is changing. It's constantly changing, and what works for year 1 may not work exactly, for year 2. So, keeping that in mind, I think is really, important. So, Tripp, this has been amazing. What a treat to be able to talk to you on Renegade Thinkers Unite. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Drew, as always.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.